So welcome everybody to today's webinar. It is Ask the Experts about peppers, which is pretty exciting. I'm Diane Blazek. I'm the Executive Director of National Garden Bureau and All America Selections. I have with me Gail Pabst, who's going to wave. Gail's going to be managing our chat, so she and I will both be looking at that. So if anybody has questions for our panelists, just put your question in the chat function and we will definitely get to your questions. So I think now what I want to do, one more housekeeping thing. My tip when you're on a webinar is to go up into the upper right on view and put it on speaker view. You just have a much better experience when you see one person at a time. And with that, I am going to start. Let's see here. I'm going to introduce my panel. I will introduce all three of you, and then you guys can each take maybe a minute or so to talk about yourself and your companies so that we understand where all this expertise comes from. Let's see here. We will start with Patty Buskirk from Seeds by Design. Hi, Patty. And Steve Balavia from Johnny Selected Seeds. Hi, Steve.
Hi,
and Peter Westerbeek from Bayer Seminus. So hello, Peter. So I'm going to go back to you, Patty. Would you like to do a short introduction?
So yes, my name's Patty Buskirk and I'm the principal owner of Seeds by Design and Terra Organics. We're a wholesale vegetable breeder company. So we don't sell retail, we sell only wholesale to the mainly the home garden trade and a little bit into the international trade. We're pretty much coined as a seed production company also. We produce, so we're a seed producer wholesaler. So you won't be able to actually come and purchase varieties from me, but I have a 450 dealer base that buys from me, and then they sell to the public or growers, this and that.
Thank you. Okay, Steve, let's toss it over to you now.
Hi, sure. Yes, I'm Steve Bellavia and I work in the research department at Johnny Selected Seeds. And one of my job duties is managing the pepper portfolio. And Johnny's, we're based in Maine and we sell to small commercial growers. And then we also sell to home gardeners, and we do a lot of PD trials here. And then we also do breeding in certain crops, and peppers is one of the crops that we do breeding on here as well.
Excellent. And next to you, Peter.
So I'm Peter Westerbeek. I live in Raleigh, North Carolina. I'm a representative for Bayer. Seminus Vegetable Seed is a brand of Bayer vegetable seed. I work in the commercial space with large commercial packer shippers. Peppers is my largest crop, as well as I have some large home garden accounts. So I work with some of the largest home garden distributors, both plant raisers and seed distributors. Peppers is one of the key breeding crops for Seminus globally, as well as in the U.S., both sweet and hot. And I actually started working in pepper fields at 13. So I've been around pepper a long time. I worked for some farmers in my youth that grew peppers commercially. So been around them a long time.
That is awesome. That's why you are one of our experts. I can only imagine if we added up the number of pepper years experience between the three of you, very impressive. So I'm sure you guys will be able to answer all of our audience's questions, as well as all the ones that I have. So I wanted to really talk about the many different types of peppers. And so I only have them divided by sweet and hot. So, but I was hoping to have a third division, maybe all other, I don't know. So who would like to talk about sweet peppers? Who would like to talk about hot peppers? And then who wants to, maybe somebody else takes that Scoville question. So who wants to do which?
Up to you. I mean, I could take the hot pepper because we are probably of the three here the most hot pepper centric business. So we sell hot pepper globally. We breed for Asia and the U.S. and Mexico and Europe, and there's a lot of different hot pepper opportunities out there. There's a lot of the super hots, which I grow in my own garden: chocolate habaneros, ghosts, reapers, as well as the more tame traditional jalapenos. I encourage home gardeners to explore the hot pepper world. There's a lot out there. Test your limits. There is such a range of heat, from really mild stuff that has less than 1,000 Scovilles that's most people can eat, to the really crazy, insane stuff. But they're all fun to grow. So I think in my garden right now I have 10 different hot pepper varieties, ranging from real benign Rio de Oro types that are great for stuffing, all the way to chocolate habaneros. So have a wide range. And yeah, I would just say explore. There's so many cool hot peppers out there.
And more coming every day from all the companies that we have here. So that's very exciting.
Yeah.
Okay, Steve or Patty, which one of you wants to talk about sweet peppers, the different types?
I could talk a little about sweet peppers if you want, Diane.
Okay.
Sure. I think one thing I like to encourage home gardeners to do is similar to what Peter said, is to keep your eyes and ears open for the different types. It's pretty common for folks just to grow bell peppers, but I think for home gardeners, there are a lot of peppers that are a lot easier to grow and also taste better, like snack peppers, the little mini ones you might see in the supermarkets. Those are easier to grow than bells. They're a little more reliable to set fruits, and the flavor's better. And then there are also the Corno di Toros, which are in Italian means a whole horn of the bull, which are long. They're 6, 7, 8 inches long. And again, they're a lot sweeter and tastier than a bell pepper. And then there are smaller versions that we call cornitos. They're basically a shortened version of a Corno di Toro. They're easier to grow. And again, they'll set fruit better, especially in cooler areas. And the flavor is just a lot superior to the bell. So I'm not telling folks not to grow bells, but just think about some of the other types that you can grow too. And if you like to pickle peppers, you also could grow some of the sweet banana types as well and pickle those, or hot bananas still. So
one of the things that I do when I'm talking to groups, when I go out and speak, I'm like totally agreeing with you, Steve, because I'm like, okay, you can just go buy a basic green bell pepper at the grocery store and it's super cheap, and okay, it's fine. But how about all these other things? Either you can't find them at your local supermarket, or they're going to be really expensive. So that's why I like to say, okay, like, as you're saying, try some variety and grow different things. So we do have a good question in here. So there are sweet and hot peppers, but how do ornamental peppers relate to this topic? So Patty, I know you work in both. So do you want to tackle that question?
Sure. So ornamental peppers, they're both hot and sweet ornamental peppers, but most ornamental peppers are actually hot, and they're just not a little bit hot. They're very, very, very hot. So you need to be really, really, really careful if you're going to be using ornamental peppers in your landscaping or in your pots. I mean, they're absolutely beautiful. Their foliage will last all summer, and then they'll turn from a green to a purple to a red color. They're super diverse. Like I said, they'll last all seasons. You'll have a color of show from summer till the first frost, but you need to be really careful. You have little people around. You don't want them to be, popping hot peppers in their mouth or this or that. But there are a few sweet peppers too that are, ornamental also. They tend to be shorter. They tend to be more, container oriented. Some of them do. And like regular peppers, there's many different, they're almost, the easiest way to describe it is there's one main species of peppers, and then there's up to 5 different subspecies of peppers, where the habanero types are a completely different species than, the bell peppers, the anum types and the Chinensia types, and even Tabasco pepper frutescens is a completely different species. They're all the same. They're all peppers. It's one of the most diverse vegetable species in the world. For a breeder, it's a potpourri of choices to select and to breed in, and to cross and to take selections in. It's one of my favorite species to actually select in. So.
Excellent.
That's the most interesting thing about peppers that I know. Lots of different shapes, lots of different sizes, lots of different flavors too.
Yes, there are. So somebody had a question about the heat. Does that come from the genetics, the species, or does it come from weather? And then I'm going to add on, or both.
It's both. Yeah, it's a function of a lot of things. Genetics is a base, and we select for certain heat levels. Like in jalapenos, there's a range. But yeah, there's no doubt that typically speaking, they would tell you the more robust or lush a hot pepper is grown, the less heat it fixes. And the inverse can be true. The more you stress a hot pepper, the more in a survival type environment, it's fixing more capsaicin to make it, less edible or less desirable to be eaten. That's sort of how it works in nature, but most of your heat level is based on genetics.
And you mentioned capsaicin, which is kind of my lead in. So explain that. And then do you want to talk about the Scoville units, the Scoville scale, how those are determined by pepper type, et cetera?
I mean, we can. I mean, I'm not probably the best person to describe it, but Scoville units is the measure we use at a research level, breeding level, and pepper level to describe how hot something is. So, and there's a couple of different ways to measure it. The way people see it in thousands is typically the way people see it, and I'm not exactly sure how to explain that. But for instance, a jalapeno, most jalapenos are between 1,500 and 5,000 Scovilles. When you start getting to habaneros, you're in the hundreds of thousands of Scovilles. So it ranges a lot. And I know that its base, it was a perception of the amount of what it took to perceive heat in a certain amount of, I believe it was water, was the original scale. One other panelist may be able to explain it better than me. But there was a method to the madness that has now been moved to a more reliable scientific method of measuring it. But we at least at Seminus, we measure everything that comes through our hot pepper program, and we pretty much know based on where it's trialed what its Scoville range is. There's certain markets that don't want peppers that are out of that range. Right now, there's a lot of jalapenos in the marketplace that are considered too mild for conventional retailers. But you can't have a jalapeno that's too hot for retailers.
True. Yeah.
Yep.
Steve, did you want to explain the Scoville scale a little bit more, or did you want me to?
I think, yeah, if you want to do that, that would be great, Patty.
So when the Scoville scale, I'll give you a little bit of history about it. When it first came out, it was very, 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 very subjective. And so people were actually, like Peter mentioned, were actually tasting for a heat level, and they've been perfecting it for years and years and years and years. Now it's pretty accurate that they're testing they're testing the fruits, they're testing the level of the oil, of the capsaicin oil in the fruits, and then they're putting it on, and then it's a range, and then it falls on the scale. When they first started, it's kind of interesting. When they first started testing, it was very subjective, and so they actually mixed peppers up in, if you believe it, cottage cheese, and then they would come and taste the cottage cheese, and then they would have different levels and say, this is 5 to 10,000, this is 100,000 to 2,000, this is 1 million, this is 500,000, this is 2 million. Then that worked great until we had some of these super duper hot, very, 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 like ghost peppers and Carolina Reaper. Peter mentioned that one earlier. It was very difficult to actually subjectively set the scale. So now the scale is much more, it's less subjective, much more scientific. Does that make sense?
Yeah, exactly. I had no idea they put it in cottage cheese. That's amazing.
I mean, we're talking 20 years ago here.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I'm still in my age, 20, 25 years ago. And then the panelist would say, I'm not going to sign up to, do Scoville testing. Thank you so much. I'm a sweet pepper consumer.
Yeah, I think that would be me. But there was a Mr. Scoville. Is that right? Is that who established it? Do you have any idea the year?
I think it was the 70s.
Oh, so fairly recently then.
Yes.
Very interesting. Okay, so we do have a question here about if you grow sweet and hot peppers near each other in the garden, will the seeds or the flesh of the sweet peppers become hot?
I've never found that to happen. So I always tell people that, you know, like Peter mentioned, 99%, 95% of the heat that's going to come from a pepper is going to be genetically how it was selected, or its type, or its, you know, its species, its genus and species. The other portion is strictly, is based a lot on environment. I have never had a hot pepper next to a sweet pepper and then it made my sweet pepper hot.
Okay.
No, the heat trait in peppers is dominant. So if you took a hot pepper and crossed it to a sweet pepper, the sweet pepper progeny, the seed you would harvest from that and plant would be predominantly hot. But in terms of the same in the season, no, the heat doesn't move around. It's specific to the variety. Because a sweet pepper, even though it may get pollinated with pollen from a hot pepper plant, it's still going to be a sweet pepper. You'll perceive no heat in it. Now, if you saved seed from that and grew them out the next year, you'd have more hot than sweet.
Yep. Then if you saved your seed and from those two plants that could have, you know, pollen, like, you know, intercrossed, you know, pollinated each other, then you would have hot peppers, potential hot peppers. You'd actually probably have a population that was, you know, all over the place.
Yeah, right. A little unpredictable. It would definitely be a surprise. Yeah. Okay, good. Let's start with starting to grow. So are there any tricks of the trade or, you know, tips that you have for home gardeners to get your pepper seeds to germinate?
Yeah, I would say you definitely want to keep them warm. If peppers really like to be in the 80s to germinate properly, if not, they tend to germinate slowly. And the other issue you get is the seed coat will sometimes stick to the seedlings if it's too cool, and they'll have a hard time shedding it, and that'll cause problems for the seedlings. So I would say uniform, even moisture, but not too wet. And then just make sure you keep it warm, at least till the seed caps pop. And bottom heat is one way to achieve that. If you're growing them in the house, maybe in the windowsill in the spring when it's cool, sometimes the air temperature might be okay, but the soil temperature could be cool. But if you put a heat mat or some other means to increase the temperature of the soil, you should get better results.
Yeah, heat is number one, warm. I always, you know, people ask me a lot about all different species of vegetables. You need to consider the origin of that vegetable or that fruit that you're growing. And, you know, the true origins for peppers are very, very, very warm growing areas. And, you know, all seeds like to be, you know, for optimum germination at different levels of heat and moisture. So, you know, do your homework. Don't, you know, and the other thing is don't grow your transplants too long. Don't have your transplants be too root bound before you go transplant them. You're going to do as much damage as, you know, growing it too cold as growing it too long before you set it out in your greenhouse.
Yeah, I would say that people like to plant tomatoes in larger pots. I would not do that with pepper. Peppers seem to like to go from a relatively small transplant compared to where a lot of people like to grow tomatoes. You know, people like to grow tomatoes in the real tall plants and plant them deep. That I would not recommend. By my experience, peppers don't tend to like that as much as tomatoes do.
So they don't necessarily need an in-between stage, a transplant stage before you put them outside then?
I've, in my personal experience, because I work with a lot of commercial growers that we transplant straight from a greenhouse. When I've repotted them and tried to grow them out bigger and then plant them, they seem to go through a much longer stress period when they're planted as a larger transplant.
Interesting.
I don't know why, but that's been largely what I've seen. Whereas tomatoes don't seem to go through that same phase.
And what about the temperature outdoors, like soil temperature? I know in the last couple of webinars, we've had our experts talking about the ideal soil temperature. What would that be for peppers? And what happens if you plant them when it's not quite that warm?
So I always say a soil temperature above 65 to 68 degrees Fahrenheit. And when, you know, and then the important thing to do is know how you're taking an accurate soil temperature. That doesn't mean when it's, you know, 3 o'clock in the afternoon and you go put a soil thermometer and it's above 65. That means the average soil temperature day and night is above 65 degrees.
And if you're in a northern area too, you can cheat a little bit by using plastic mulch, which helps warm the soil. And after you transplant, you can put a floating row cover over it too, which will increase the heat under there and give a little bit of a warmer microenvironment. Also, if you get a late frost, it'll protect the crop from freezing also. That's another critical thing. You don't want to transplant too early, because if it's too cold, the seedling's just going to sit there and not grow anyway. Plus you risk a frost, which could kill your crop.
Now I'm doubting myself. I planted some peppers in ground last week in Chicago. I think I shouldn't have done that. So do you have any tips for me who got a little over anxious and planted some of my peppers already? Other than plastic mulch, anything else I should be doing? Oops.
If you have row cover lying around, you could put it over the plants. That would probably help if it's going to be real cold, especially.
Yeah, you can cover them, you know, you can cover them with anything, you know, at night when it's going to get cold. You can always also, it's not as effective as like plastic mulch, but Diane, you can also mulch with straw or, you know, any other kind of barrier that you're putting on top of the soil to keep it warmer. It's you know, those are all just tools and all processes that you can just increase your soil temperature to keep, you know, to keep they're basically heat loving, you know, warm loving climate plants warmer. You can cover them, you know, in the evening, every evening with a, you know, so some people even use a milk carton, you know, go out and put a milk carton over the top of them at night until they get too big. You know, I'm talking about when they're little bitty guys. And
Yeah.
that'll protect them in the evenings. Take it off during the day because you don't want to have them have any sunburn or anything like that.
Excellent. So we have a question for you, Peter. Based on what Peter just said about the pot size, is it a bad idea to buy pepper plants that are already in a pot larger than 4 inches when you go to the garden center?
If they're flowering and you have a choice, I would probably prefer I would personally buy one in a smaller pot. Yes. Now, if your peppers get frosted out and you're looking to gain some time back, it's not like they're not going to work, not like they're going to perform or make fruit, but they just tend to go through more shock. You may lose your crown set. If you go to a garden center and there's already flowers on the pot, they probably, when you transplant them, they're probably going to shed those blooms. And those will not be peppers. So I'm not saying don't do it, but if you have a option and the time to buy a smaller transplant, by my experience, you tend to have a better outcome with a smaller plant.
And then we've got a question too about when you're planting them outdoors, how deeply should you plant? Can you bury them like you do with tomatoes, or should you plant them even with the soil level that they are in the pot?
So tomato plants have aerial roots on their nodes, so you can plant them just about, you could plant a tomato up to it to the first true leaf level that's on a tomato, and it'll flourish and it'll make auxiliary roots. Peppers don't tend to like that. So I you know, you can bury it a little bit deeper than the soil that the transplant or the plug comes in, because you want to seal that transplant, you know, because if you're looking at a little, you know, transplant like I transplant their little, you know, 1 by 1 or 2 by 2 plug, but in a pot I tend to still cover like 1 inch or so above, you know, the 4-inch pot that you purchase it in at the garden center, because I want to seal that root mass under my soil level. So but I wouldn't want to bury it 2, 3, 4 inches, you know, deep up to the first true leaf. So that's typically what I do and have success.
Any other comments from Steve or Peter on the planting depth?
I do the same what Patty does too, a little bit deeper. And I think that helps keep the transplants from lodging or tipping over as well. Gives them a little more support so they stay upright.
You just have to separate in your mind. It will not root from the stem like tomatoes do.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. So a little bit of support, cover the root, but not to the same extent that you do a tomato. So that's good. Here's a question about deformities. What are some of the main factors for having, particularly in bell peppers and sweet snacking types, any kind of shape deformity? Is that a pollination issue or what else?
It
So-
often is pollination, and probably the most common is pollination. Sometimes it's where it's sitting against the limb, or it physically can't grow because of limb structure. But mostly it's pollination.
Yeah, pollination, other deformities like sunburn and things like that are weather related or heat related, but temperature has a lot to do with pollination. So weather and pollination would be the top two for me. Hot peppers don't tend to have as much of a problem pollinating as sweet peppers do.
So is it fair to say that hot peppers are easier to grow than sweet, or is that not a fair statement?
I think it depends on the sweet pepper, but typically hot peppers are easier to grow.
Yeah, they seem to tolerate the vagaries of the weather better than do sweet peppers, especially bells.
Yeah, and the smaller the sweet pepper, as was previously said, the better they tend to do.
Right.
Yeah, I think hot peppers also tolerate irrigation errors, so dryness and over irrigation and under irrigation. From from a home gardener standpoint, I think hot peppers tolerate that better too.
So
Yeah,
there's kind of the oh,
We're
sorry,
discovering
Peter,
that
go
there's
ahead.
more nematode resistance sort of out there in hot pepper genetics than maybe we've explored as an industry. But there's no doubt, as we're doing some internal work within Simmons, we're discovering a good bit of nematode resistance in bell peppers. I mean, in hot peppers that we didn't necessarily know existed.
So you brought up breeding work. So usually this is one of the things I would ask in the very beginning, and I kind of forgot. But let's talk about breeding a little bit. One of the main things that all the breeding companies, I'm sure, are working on are disease resistance in the newer varieties. But do you want to talk about some of the other things that you're targeting, how you decide what you're breeding for, how do you find out from consumers what they're looking for? And all three of you can address this one.
So yeah, of course, everybody's breeding for extra disease resistance, especially when it comes to market gardeners and growers and commercial peppers. There's always another disease that's always wanting to attack, a crop, and it doesn't make any difference if it's peppers or tomatoes or anything. So disease selection is always a number one concern for a plant breeder. And one that's always addressed, and a lot of people overlook, is earliness, because not everybody is in the Sun Belt of the United States. I mean, Diane, you live in Chicago and you just set your peppers out. You're going to tend to choose a variety that's a little bit earlier than some of the long season Guajillo types or something like that, that's going to take 100, 110, 120 days to color up so you can go make mole. It might be easier for you just to buy your dried peppers to make your mole. But you'll be more successful with something that's selected for earliness in the northern areas of the United States. So disease, earliness, color, different colors of peppers, different now different striping and colors on peppers is more and more available. So, and all those traits are genetically linked, of course. So whatever you're selecting for, and intermediate colors in peppers, because they tend to be green, and then they'll go sometimes yellow or orange, and then they'll go to red. So there's all, purple is actually an intermediate color when it comes to peppers. That's not a mature color. That's an intermediate color that's along the journey, along the maturity path. So.
And at Johnny's, in our pepper program, we also breed for earliness. We have a lot of customers in short season as well as long season areas. We also breed to get a rugged, sturdy plant that's less apt to lodge and with good leaf cover to protect the plants from sunburn. And also probably the most important thing that we breed for is flavor. We want to make sure if we're breeding Corno de Toros or snack peppers that they're going to taste really good.
That's a great point. And I just want to point out that all three of our panelists have a lot of AS winners, and they have a lot of pepper winners. And that's what our judges always look for, is taste and texture and yield and disease resistance. And then I think, Steve, you said twice lodging. I just want to clarify for everybody that lodging means breaking or bending stems, correct?
Or the plant just tipping over.
Oh, the plant tipping over. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Wanted to clarify that. We're getting all kinds of questions here. Some of my sweet pepper seedlings have curled, wrinkly leaves. I no longer have the small flies that I had last month. Would this maybe be a deficiency in feeding?
My first guess, and I'm not looking at the peppers, is it could be viral.
Yeah.
I mean, if she, and the only reason I jumped to that is because if she had some kind of a insect, infestation 2-3 weeks ago, most insects are carrying, they're vectoring those, those viruses. Now, most tomato peppers are tested for seed-borne viruses, viroids, and bacteria. So typically you're not going to have that on the fruit when it starts to grow, but it's 100% vectored by insects. So if she's having any leaf curl or any discoloration, any mottling on the leaves, my first guess would be, not even looking at it, would say it's a virus infestation, now.
Yeah, look at the most newly emerged leaves. If they are not crinkly, if they are more traditionally looking, good color, you probably don't have a problem. It's just a physiological reaction to whatever the insect pressure that was. If the newly emerged leaves look normal, you're probably going to be fine. If they're also crinkly and under stress, then you're likely fighting some sort of pathogen or a virus or something like that.
And what would you recommend that she does?
Discard it.
Okay, pull it out, get rid of it so it doesn't spread.
Yep, it's early in the season, start again.
Excellent. So going back to planting peppers, we've heard, and somebody has asked, should you pinch out the tops when transplanting? I think somebody else worded it a little bit differently, topping the crown area to make it a bushier plant. Yes or no, or is it depends on what type of pepper you're growing?
I've never done that, and I've never recommended it. So
yeah, I've had this question a lot, and our general answer is no. It will definitely cause bell peppers. Larger the pepper, maturity will go later, and you'll have smaller peppers. There's numerous studies to show that, because this has been researched. Probably less significant on your mini peppers, but you'll definitely delay maturity. And if you're in a northern area, losing maturity probably gets you further behind, getting you further behind than anything you might gain from pinching it out. I don't know of a reason to do it.
Yeah, I think when I've heard it, it was always to make the plant bushier. But with today's breeding and the new peppers, they're breeding for yield, so there probably are going to be bushier. So just don't even bother. Don't pinch them back. Kind of an old wives' tale, I think.
I agree. And later on, if you are growing a larger, more vigorous plant, stake it.
Yes. Let it grow tall, stake it.
Yep. Add some kind of support. You're going to do more damage by pinching it instead of, staking it or adding some kind of support later on.
Excellent. Okay, so going back to our questions, and I'm going to say right off the top, this is not my question, and I hope it's not my question in a week or so, but it says, my peppers were nipped by frost. I cut the damaged leaves off and they are showing new growth. Will they be stunted? Or what happened to my peppers? What's going to be the repercussions by planting them too early?
I think if they've been nipped by frost, they're definitely going to be delayed and it's going to slow them down. But if the plants were big enough, there's still growing points left. They should grow out of it okay. It's just going to compromise your maturity. It's kind of like pinching your plant almost, really. The frost did it for you, but not that you wanted that.
Yeah, I agree. And some it's an interesting, you can do an experiment in your own backyard if you had a little bit of frost on it. If you have room, go get it, go to the garden center and go purchase another plant and plant it next to it. And then you can actually see for yourself just exactly what the damage of the frost and what the setback is, because you'll probably notice if you go and buy a plant that hasn't been frosted, that hasn't been set back, that isn't physiologically being stunted, then you can see what, sometimes you're better off just to go plant another plant. But I did that experiment in my garden, and I just, left one. I had like 3 or 4. So I took 2 out and I put 2 new ones in there. And the ones that I replanted after the frost did much better.
Yeah, and I think if there's just a little tiny bit of frost on it, it's not so bad. But yeah, if it really get compromised, I agree with what Patty said. You're probably better off with new plants.
So as far as pinching out the tops, I had my bunnies do that for me a couple of years ago. And yeah, and especially being here in Chicago, I barely got any peppers off because it was just, I should have gone and bought another plant and just replanted that one. Thank you very much, bunnies. Let's see here. Here's another question. I started bell pepper seeds indoors. They looked great. I hardened them off as I should have. I transitioned outside. Still great, just 0 growth after 3 weeks. Is that normal? What's wrong? What should I do?
The first thing that I'd ask somebody is, what is your daytime temperatures and what is your soil temperature? So every gardener wants to get a jump on, these long season plants. And sometimes when you harden them off and you think, oh, it's going to be fine. I'm from California, and we've had the craziest spring. I mean, we just had 34, 35 last weekend, and now we're into the 90s. So, my tomato plants have just been sitting there for 2-3 weeks because the evening, the nighttime temperatures are down in the 40s and the upper 30s. And then, I'm not getting any true frost, but it's just too cold. They don't like it. They're a warm season. They're a heat loving plant. They're just sitting there because the soil, basically the soil temperature is too cold and it's too cold outside.
And if you're in an area where it's difficult to grow bell peppers because you get a cool spring, if in a home garden, I think if you grow ace peppers as well as some other varieties, that's a good thing, because ace, it's real early, it's a little elongated, but it tends to set fruits even in real cool weather and rain and that sort of thing. So I would recommend, if you're a home gardener in a cool climate, plant at least a few ace peppers before you grow your other bells. And then again, consider some of the other types too, like the Corno de Toros or Cornitos, which are easy to grow too.
Excellent. I think you guys had mentioned this a little bit when we were talking about deformities, but let's talk about pollinators. I believe you said that the hot peppers needed a little bit less, or are a little bit less reliant on pollinators than the sweet peppers. But number one, do they need to be pollinated? Number two, any tips, suggestions on there, and any other things to identify maybe why it didn't get pollinated or what to do? Big topic.
Peppers are true flowers, so they don't need pollinators.
Okay, so maybe it's not a big topic. You ended that one right there.
I mean, if you get deformities, mostly it's weather, wind, and or rain, heavy rain that doesn't allow pollen to move in the air. It's typically, and I don't know. I defer to one of my other panelists. I know at certain temperature, pepper pollen becomes non-viable. I don't remember what that temperature is, but high heat can also cause pollen to be non-viable.
Yeah, so the pepper plant, it has the male and female parts in the flower. So generally it'll pollinate itself. But like Peter said, if it's real hot, it might abort a blossom and not produce a fruit at all. Or if it's real cold, the pollen won't pollinate very well, and you'll get small or misshapen fruits. And you'll see that they're small when you cut them open. There won't be many seeds because it didn't pollinate very well. So sometimes if you get the first sets that are small or malformed, if you wait a little bit, when the fruit's set again, when it's warmer, you'll get normal fruits.
Yep, I agree 100%. Every plant has an optimal pollination zone, and peppers have theirs. And in cool coastal climates, that's where you're gonna have more problems with deformities and, you know, pollination in a cooler setting. Whereas if you're in a warmer Mediterranean climate, you know, more stable, warm area, not crazy hot, you know, over 100, 102 degrees, and, you know, more temperate, you're going to have more success, you know, with the pollination of your complete flowers, which, you know, means both male and female part, you know, both of those, you know, are on the same flower.
So you don't even necessarily need more than one plant. One pepper plant will pollinate itself with the male and female flowers.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and they're not male and female flowers. Each flower has both parts.
Yes.
So it has a stigma, which is a female part, and when it gets pollinated by the anthers where the pollen is, and then it'll produce the fruit. So you don't even need insects. That the flower will generally pollinate itself.
Excellent. Is there a terminology, scientific terminology for that you want to share?
They're classically self-compatible, and they are what Steve is exactly right. When the stigmatic surface, which is the surface that the pollen germinates upon, that as that grows through the corolla or the cone of the anthers, it will actually pollinate. It'll pollinate the plant by itself. So you only need one. It's not like almonds or any other plants that, you know, a peach tree or this, that you have to have a pollinator. They're completely 100% self-compatible, and they will pollinate themselves. So if you decide, hey, I am a jalapeno lover and I eat, you know, all the jalapeno poppers that you can grill in my backyard, then and you grow one jalapeno plant, and that may keep you in all the jalapenos you need. You don't need another pepper plant to pollinate it. The only reason people buy different pepper plants is so they can have different shaped fruit and different flavors and different heat levels and maturities.
Excellent. And you'll see bees flying around pollinating it, but it is not necessary.
But that's okay. We let them come anyway. We love our bees. What about companion plants for peppers? Are there good or necessary plants to plant with them? Or, you know, conversely, are there any plants that really, I'm thinking of like one container, if you're putting several things in, is there something you shouldn't put with peppers, or are there things that are really good to plant near and next to peppers?
I've planted all kinds of things next to peppers and never, ever had any, you know, problem with, you know, whether it's creeping oregano that's you know, I have a pepper plant in a pot, and then I put some oregano in there that, you know, I'm successful with just about anything that you plant that you plant in there. So
Peppers are just like the easygoing guys of the world. They don't need anything else. They work well with everybody else, right? That's what it sounds like.
I would avoid anything that needs a lot of fertility. Peppers need fertility. They're pretty fertility hungry, particularly calcium. Anything that's vigorous that would physiologically compete, I would avoid. But herbs, anything like that, largely are. My hot pepper bias says plant plenty of cilantro next to your jalapenos.
Sounds wonderful. Have your salsa right there. Tomato. But you brought up something else. I think you're reading my questions. Somebody had asked about fertilization. So can we talk about that? What type of fertilizer might be best? How frequently, etc.?
Well, the general pepper are pretty good heavy feeders. I know not necessarily nitrogen, but they you don't want to skimp on them. Balsam end rot, which is the overarching thing people tend to get concerned about, is a calcium deficiency. It's not necessarily always tied to lack of calcium. It can be tied to lack of mobility of calcium to the growing point. So, and that could be tied to other lack of fertility issues. So, as a general rule, you want to keep pepper fairly well fertigated.
Yeah, and the only issue is if there's a huge amount of nitrogen, you could get a plant that stays vegetative and doesn't produce many fruits, but that has to be really an excessive amount of nitrogen for that to occur.
Yeah, most people don't realize that if you put too much nitrogen, like Steve mentioned, there's, being an agronomist, it's called a nitrogen or a fertilizer triangle. And if you have too much of one or another and things aren't balanced, that actually ties up your micronutrients like calcium, boron, and some of these other things. So peppers, and I think it's the reason why they work so well in gardens, is they're good miners for micronutrients and this and that, as long as you don't have it out of balance and out of whack. So a general good overall fertilizer works the best for them. And, maybe not one that is extremely high in nitrogen, but just a nice, well-balanced fertilizer. I think that's another reason that they work so well in organic culture, is because a well-balanced organic fertilizer that has enough nitrogen, because you can't skimp on the nitrogen. So you can't say, hey, I'm not going to put any out there, because that's what drives to feed the plant. But at the same time, a well-balanced fertilizer is going to be what you're going to need. You're going to be the most successful with your peppers.
So are you saying like a 10-10-10 would be balanced?
Typical,
okay. Okay, so here's a question, and I've never heard of this, and so I'm hoping I don't stump you guys, but somebody is asking, are you recommending hydrozoning?
So hydrozoning, there's fertigation, and I don't think that's the same as hydrozoning. Or if somebody's talking about like buried drip or some kind of underground irrigation, I only grow my peppers in my trials and in my production fields on a buried drip system where the emitters are buried, 7 to 8 inches down. And most commercial crops are grown that way also. I mean, Peter could speak more about how they're grown commercially in different, whether it's Mexico or California or, the southern portion of the United States. But, if that's what they're referring to, they actually perform really, really, really well with sub irrigation, especially in an area where you're going to potentially have some bacteria pressure, in hot, humid, areas of the United States in the South or the Northeast where it gets hot. You can, and if they're not resistant to those types of bacterial diseases, then you can end up. So I'm wondering if that's what they're meaning by hydrozone.
We can ask them to expand on their question. And while they're maybe typing that in, I'm going to ask another question. So like the pinching tops is kind of like a social media, everybody says, that they should do it. And we've kind of debunked that. So what about Epsom salts? According to social media, Epsom salts cures the entire world's problems of all types. So I don't know if somebody wants to address Epsom salts for peppers. Yes, no, or it depends.
Epsom salts is a great soil amendment if your soil is at a pH level that you need to add salt. If it's already, if it's, whether it's high, whether it's low. So if you already have a very alkaline soil, adding Epsom salts isn't going to help. I mean, you should be adding something acidic to balance your soil to a more neutral pH. So before you would go add any, as far as amendment that would amend the pH of your soil, I would test your soil before you would do that. So, not that Epsom salts wouldn't be the answer if you have a high acidic soil. Then yeah, add your Epsom salts. But if you don't, you could do more damage, or you could be, increasing the salt level in your soil to a dangerous level that, nothing might not grow. So.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because when we relaunched the whole Victory gardening trend interest a couple years ago, there were two things that we determined we should be telling all these new gardeners is know your growing zone and do a soil test. Those two things are going to make you a more successful gardener. So does anybody else want to add anything to the Epsom salts comments, or that's pretty much conclusion?
Well, I would just say, unless you know what you're doing, don't put salts in your garden.
Thank you.
I don't know, and I've been doing this 30 plus years, and I would not know what to do with Epsom salts in my garden.
Yeah, I wouldn't either. I've never used them either.
Excellent. Okay. We're trying to debunk some of these things that are going around social media. So we've done 2 so far. Congratulations. You guys are doing great. I wanted to, wow, our time is going so fast. I think we need to talk, somebody is asking about how many peppers does one plant produce? It depends what type of pepper. But I think we need to talk about growing peppers in containers, because a lot of people are growing in containers now. I know that there's a lot of new breeding work also on more compact peppers. We've had a couple AAS winners. But who wants to tackle growing in containers and some tips?
Well, I do it. Definitely pick your varieties that match, right, plant type wise. But in my experience, you tend to overwater and you tend to under fertilize in a pot. As a general rule, that's where people make mistakes. Make sure your pot has good drainage, and you get air to the roots. So overwatering, avoid, and under fertilizing, avoid. So that means fertilizer more frequently, but water less. Those two things tend to, peppers do not like wet feet. Other than that, and stake them.
And what about the pot size? That's kind of one of my beefs, I guess, is people think they can get away with growing in, an 8-inch pot. And it's like, you have to have the right size pot for multiple reasons. But like, for example, if your tag on your pot, on your plant says that it gets 24 inches tall, what size container should you be planting in?
So a rule of thumb with a plant is if it tells you that it's going to get 24 inches tall, it'll grow a root structure almost as large, at least 2/3 the amount of the plant. So in normal soil conditions. So if it says 20 to 26 inches, then you need to imagine that underneath the soil you could produce a web mat of at least 18 to 20 inches. And if it says it's going to spread to 15, 16, then it's going to be 12 inches wide. So so imagine, if it's going to be that much, how large of a pot do I need to successfully grow one pepper plant? And then if you're going to companion plant at that, now it doesn't make a difference if it's a long, tall cylindrical plant, because, surface area and pot size and soil, are relative. The other thing is if you don't have enough soil, whether it's a soilless mix or, actual garden soil or this or that in your container or your raised bed or your whatever, that's where most plants mine their micronutrients. So if you have a soilless mix that you're planting a plant in, you need to, Peter nailed it, you need to continually fertigate with a very, very well balanced fertilizer every time you irrigate. So you're always going to have those nutrients available for your plant to grow.
Excellent. Okay, so are you guys ready for sharing some favorites? I've been thinking about how I want to do this. So I'm going to toss out, like, what's your favorite small sweet snacking pepper? Each one of you are going to name a variety. Then I'm going to toss out, what's your favorite jalapeno? And then you're going to toss out a variety. Are you game for this? And we can kind of wrap up by tossing out some varieties and making it quick. So Okay, Patty, you're on my screen. So we're going to start with you, and I'm going to ask you, what's your favorite variety of small snacking peppers?
Okay, well, I grow my AAS winner for a small snacking pepper. It's called Pretty and Sweet, mainly because it's a small snacking pepper and an ornamental at the same time. Then I can grow it on my patio, and I usually grow it with some herbs or some, low growing, other ornamental, early in the spring, it'll be pansies when I first set it out. Then it'll change over to, something else that's a little warmer for the rest of the season. And I'll have snacking peppers all summer on my patio.
Excellent. Steve, your favorite small snacking sweet pepper?
Yeah, we have the lunchbox red and yellow and orange that we bred, and they're early and sweet, and they're kind of a nice snacking size. So I like those ones quite a bit.
Okay, now Peter, I know you're a hot pepper guy, but do you eat sweet peppers? Do you like them?
Yep, and both varieties, those are good varieties, but my colleagues mentioned are good because I've grown them both. I'm gonna go a little bit different. My dad's favorite sweet pepper is a sweet habanero. Believe it or not, he loves roulette, which is an AAS winner. Never been a hot pepper guy, but he uniquely likes roulette. I'm surprised by it when I first grew it about 4 or 5 years ago, and he tried them. That is his go-to. I got 3 plants in the garden right now of roulette just for him.
Excellent. Wow, you guys are doing a great job mentioning AAS winners. I didn't even ask you to do that. Okay, let's do jalapeno. Can you name your favorite jalapeno variety? Peter, you're on my screen, so I'm going to let you go first this time.
Well, the variety Emerald Fire, which is an AAS winner from, I don't know, Dan, 10 years ago, something like that. Still a very solid one, kind of not too hot, does not crack very much. And if you read to go back and look at the comments from the AAS judges, very, very solid jalapeno for a home gardener.
Okay, Patty, favorite jalapeno?
I like all jalapenos. I live in California, and I have a long growing season. So I'm even successful with open pollinated jalapenos. So, I mean, if you just go pick up a plant that even says jalapeno tam or jalapeno M, I mean, I can be successful with those. I love Emerald Fire, and I knew there's a new AAS winner that is
Jalapeno.
that
That
is
little one for
that is a
containers.
compact jalapeno, and that one is. I'm also an AAS judge, so I loved it when we grew it, and so it's fresh in my mind that it's a compact, jalapeno that anybody can grow and early.
Okay, Steve, do you eat jalapenos?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay,
I'm
what's
a
your
hot pepper
favorite?
guy too. My favorite would be Jedi. And what I like about it, it's got big 3.5 to 4 inch fruits, and the plant gets really big, and it's what you call a continuous set type. So if you keep harvesting it, it'll keep really producing huge amounts of fruit as long as you keep picking it until it finally frosts out in the fall. It's
Okay,
got good heat level too.
excellent. Okay, so now it's 11 in Chicago. It's the end of our webinar, which is going way too fast. And so now you can end by your favorite overall pepper that you haven't already mentioned, and then we will wrap up our webinar. So Steve, you're on my screen. So
Yeah,
you can do yours.
My favorite type are serranos because I like peppers that are hot, and I like to chop them and cook with them a lot because you get a good heat level, and there's a relatively high dry matter, so they cook fast, and you could put them in Mexican or Indian or Thai or almost any kind of cooking. You also can freeze them whole or in rings and use them in the winter. So that's my
Excellent.
favorite for those reasons. Yeah.
Who's next, Patty or Peter?
I'll go. My favorite way to eat peppers is grilled or roasted by far. And so my 2 favorite peppers for doing that, one is, it's called Mamma Mia Giallo. It's a hybrid golden Marconi type. And then for the red version of that, I buy Johnny's Carmen.
Both of which are AAS winners. So that's excellent. Okay, Peter, I think we get to close with your favorite pepper.
Oh, that's really tough. But the thing I do every year is I grow chocolate habaneros. It's a chocolate habanero variety that I get from a particular vendor, and I dehydrate them and turn them into chili powder, which I use in chilies. And my family doesn't eat hot stuff. I do. So Probably just a chocolate habanero that I did dehydrate and grind in chili powder.
Excellent. You had to change things up. That's good.
I think the panelist here basically with our favorites showed you how diverse they are, and peppers can be, you know, nailed it. You know, you can eat them dry, you can eat them, you know, you can eat them roasted, you can eat them fresh. There's a lots and lots and lots of ways to utilize peppers as a spice, as a vegetable, as a fruit. So,
and as decoration too.
And what I do the same thing that Peter did. And one thing, if you can grind them outside of the house, it's good because you don't want that powder getting around, and you definitely want a dust mask and maybe goggles. And if you wear contacts, put rubber gloves on.
Yeah, if you grind coffee in that particular coffee grinder, definitely clean it well.
Yeah.
That might be the best tips of the day is how to
experience. Trust me,
yeah.
that was not a fun day.
But in the end, it's all worth it. So, okay. Oh my gosh, you guys were awesome. I love that we're finishing like around lunchtime for a lot of people, because I think we got hungry listening to all this about peppers. So we have recorded this. We will post it on our YouTube channel. And thank you to our panelists. You guys were wonderful. And we will invite you back. Maybe there's peppers part 2, who knows? So thank you very much. And everybody have a great day.